From the National Weather Service in Raleigh, it's Nick Petro with your 5 p.m. update here on Wednesday, the 17th of February, 2021. Now, we have a winter storm set to impact central North Carolina with icing and potential flooding. And that's been the big change since we talked at 11:30. We now have a flood watch in effect for parts of the area, basically south of I-85. And we did make a few slight adjustments. And I've got more information on the rivers. So that's going to be this briefing is going to have more of a hydro information than what we had at 11:30. So let's go ahead and take a look at current observations real quick. So yeah, basically everything's still on track. We've got temperatures in the 40s, which is very nice, but dew points are still in the 20s and teens to our north. So some of that teens dew points will still be coming down into our area with on northerly winds. So we're set to cool down nicely this evening. And once this leading edge of the precipitation makes its way, northeastward and gets into our area late overnight, then we'll begin to even more so cool down the atmosphere. So anyway, but it's good to see that it's been sunny all day, and that's had a good chance to warm up the surface and the roads. I would certainly, I feel much better going into this event with having sunshine and all the pavement and concrete and asphalt being warmed up than if we were going into this with the surface is really cold. So anyway, not saying that's really going to help a whole lot, but it'll help some. So anyway, that's the current conditions. I've expanded this slide quite a bit because I wanted to split out the fact that, once you get above a 1/4 inch of ice, then I'd like to call that heavy icing, which means basically what that means is, far more power outages than if you only had a 1/4 inch of ice. So anyway, and I added a power outage row to this, basically saying, widespread power outages along and north of 85, with power outages more scattered in nature south of 85 toward Highway 64. And if I was a little bit more precise than this, I'd say central Highway 64, because certainly the eastern parts of Highway 64 corridor aren't going to be as bad. So anyway, in terms of the worst travel, that would be obviously the further north you go to the Virginia border. That's where the worst of the travel will be. And, again, I keep kind of relating back to last week's icing event. Since it's fresh in our mind, and that just happened, that's a good sort of storm to compare, because, we got about a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/10 of an inch of ice last week up near the Virginia border, and even parts of the Triad saw, 1/4 inch of ice. And really what that amounted to was a lot of power outages. I mean, there was a lot of folks with power out for quite some time, with really a lot of tree damage. So, those places that got it last time are going to be the climatologically favored locations to get it this time. That's a fairly easy part of the forecast. The hard part of the forecast is what happens in between. And areas south of those areas that got ice last week. Okay. So this event might bring some ice a little bit further south than the places last week. Okay. So I'll get to that more in a moment. I did want to also mention the flash flooding and river flooding, particularly, the counties you see listed there for under location, Anson, Cumberland, Edgecombe, Franklin, Halifax, Harnett, Hope, Johnson, Lee, Montgomery, Moore, Nash, Richmond, Sampson, Scotland, Wake, Wayne, and Wilson all are under a flash flood watch, because there's going to be episodes of heavy downpours moving across the area. And, the soils are very saturated. Obviously, that goes without saying. So that'll increase the risk for flash flooding. And then eventually all that runs into the rivers. Many of the rivers are already flooding, and perhaps that'll keep them going in flood, or maybe even worsen it somewhat. All right, so I've updated this as well to kind of give a sense, significant icing north of 85, and just to kind of give you a sense of how bad, it is relative to prior events in other areas. Okay, so someone during the 11:30 briefing asked if I could provide a little bit more time detail in terms of, including more of these thumbnails here. And you know, basically what this conveys here is that around midnight, we're going to start to see that initial light rain move in. A lot of it's not going to reach the ground because of how dry it is near the surface, but it will start out as rain. And then as it does dry up, it'll cool the atmosphere, particularly near the surface. And that'll set us up for basically a wintry mix, if not freezing rain, north of I-85 once the heavier precip moves in later or mid to late overnight. So again, you could see that area along and north of 85 will be freezing rain. There could be some sleet mixing in at times, but once you get south of 27, the 27 corridor, it looks like it's mostly rain. Okay, now some of our models are suggesting that some sleet, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised to even see a snowflake or two, maybe a snow grain try to get involved, but it's just so warm aloft. I don't know how our models are trying to spit out snow. I think that's just kind of I think what the models in the blue are trying to convey is more in the way of sleet. It just seems like it's going to warm up too much for any snow to get involved. Nevertheless, you know, certainly it's going to be a little bit of a mix, probably a freezing rain and sleet mix rather than snow. And the models still try to convey that through mid or late morning, again, north of 85, where it will be the coldest and where it'll be more prolonged. And then finally, once we get to about noon, then that first wave of precip will be ending, particularly as it relates to where it's freezing rain along the north of 85. Let me back up to the 9 a.m. frame on the lower left, and you could see that you know, that freezing rain, once it really gets going, between 6 and 9 a.m., it could reach as far south as you know, the Uwharrie Forest area. So you know, the Highway 27 region. So basically, you know, it could be a little bit further south. It's not going to stay there, freezing rain that far south for very long. So I don't think the accumulation in that, you know, southwest portion of central North Carolina is going to be very prolonged. So anyway, by mid-afternoon, it looks like things are going to lighten up, maybe just some drizzle. That will be the end of the first wave of precip. And then as we go into the evening, tomorrow evening, then the second wave of precip moves in with freezing rain redeveloping along and north of 85. And this time, it's confined to places along and north of 85. It looks like during that break in the afternoon, it looks like things will warm up enough so that the only place that will have freezing rain for wave number 2 in the evening will be along and north of 85. And that's important because that's where the heaviest icing will occur. And that's why places along and north of 85 will have the heaviest amounts because they're going to get freezing rain with both waves. Whereas once you get south of 85, the second wave comes in rain and hopefully will melt some of the ice that occurs south of 85. Okay, but the other thing I want to draw your attention to is some of the models are suggesting we could get into some episodes of heavy rain. You know, maybe even some thunderstorms could get involved, particularly south near the South Carolina border and from the central and southern I-95 corridor eastward. There could be some rumbles of thunder. Don't be surprised if you see some lightning or hear some thunder. But more importantly, it will give us some heavy rain at times. And that's why we're concerned about the risk for flash flooding. So anyway, when we get to the overnight hours after midnight tomorrow night, the rain will be diminishing, and then basically it's drying out by Friday morning. Just real quick, Ronnie asked a question, what's the difference between freezing rain and sleet? And just to kind of get this out of the way real quick, sleet is like an ice pellet. It bounces, okay? It hits the ground and bounces. Whereas freezing rain literally lands on the surface as liquid. And then once it comes in contact with the surface, then it freezes. Okay, so it hits the surface as ice with sleet. Okay, sleet hits the surface as ice. Freezing rain hits the surface as liquid and then freezes. Okay, so that's the difference there. Neither one is any good, to tell you the truth, in terms of hazards. But freezing rain sticks to the trees and sleet does not. Okay, so you know, I think if we do, let me back up here. If we do, that could be one thing that helps us. Okay, if we do get into some sleet in that 6 to 9 a.m. period, I think that would actually be very helpful because sleet does not stick to trees and power lines. So if we do see some sleet occurring, then it will obviously we'll know tomorrow morning as it's happening. That will result in ice accumulation amounts that will need to be cut back. Okay, which is good. Which is good. That doesn't mean it's any good for roads. That's still a hazard. Sleet is still a hazard for roads and travel, but sleet is a much better situation for trees and power lines. Okay, so right now it looks like a mostly freezing rain event. The underlying data would suggest mostly freezing rain. Okay, but the model p-type indicators are trying to suggest a little sleet might get involved. So anyway, I just want to share that just so nobody's surprised if there is a little bit of sleet, and maybe that helps to cut back a little bit on the ice amounts. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but anyway, given the scenario I just laid out, here's our latest ice accumulation forecast. Not a whole lot different than what we shared at 11:30. We're talking a half inch to a quarter to a half inch of ice along and north of 85. So if your county touches 85, basically you're included in that half up the half inch ice accumulation. And obviously the worst of it, we're expecting higher amounts up near the Virginia border. The real challenge, okay, is the place that's always a challenge, and it's this area right in between. Okay, this gradient where you go from nothing to 0.2 of an inch of rain. You know, if the temperature varies a degree or so either way, this transition line could easily move one way or the other. Okay. So my confidence is not particularly high in this area that I just circled, okay? And it never is high. This is notoriously the challenge, and I borrow that phrase from a friend John who I spoke with earlier. He said it perfectly. Notoriously difficult is the way some of these winter forecasts are, and it's particularly notoriously difficult to exactly pinpoint where this transition and where this gradient axis is going to line up. Okay, but the bulk of the data would suggest that that's where we get into this transition. And I will add that most of what you see here south of 85, most of that is going to fall with wave number 1 in the morning. Okay, so by afternoon, this area should warm up, and wave number 2 looks like it's a mostly rain event, okay, except for areas north of 85. That's where it stays freezing rain with wave number 2, and that's why we have the highest amounts north of 85. But anyway, this area that I circled, that is the challenge, okay? We could be off a little bit either way, and that could make all the difference in the world. Let me show you another tool that I like to use. I think I've showed this before on a couple other webinars, but this model is courtesy of the Spore Prediction Center, and this is an ensemble, if you will. This is the average of several 6 to 9 or so really good models. Okay, it takes these models and it says, okay, what is the average outcome of all of these? And basically what I'm going to do is run you through this, because obviously if you take the average of a bunch of models, that should be a better forecast than any one of the given models that goes into it, right? So anyway, this time frame, I'll try to do the conversion of the time on the fly, but this is basically like around 11 p.m. tonight. And again, the color coding is green for rain, red for ice, pink for sleet, and blue for snow. So this is 1 a.m. tonight, 2 a.m., and notice how the rain quickly changes to freezing rain. The blue line is the 32-degree line. So south of that blue line, it's above freezing. North of that blue line, it's below freezing. And you can see that this time frame right here is 3 a.m. Look how far south that freezing rain line gets. But fortunately, we think that the amounts that far south will be will be on the low end, just because it doesn't stay freezing rain that far south. And notice along the eastern edge, look how close that is. Johnston County, you look like you're just barely getting away with not seeing the freezing rain. Maybe right along the far western edge, you might see a little bit of freezing rain right at the beginning, but Wilson and Edgecombe and eastern Halifax, looks like those areas should stay rain, and the counties near the South Carolina border should stay rain. The northern I-95 corridor, I might add, will see some of that freezing rain. And then it just kind of hangs out in that region. So, if it does stay freezing rain that long, then the ice totals across the southern end that I just showed you may be underdone. And as I continue to move this forward, this is late morning and about noontime tomorrow. And then as I run through the afternoon, this is the afternoon, look how it retreats north, the freezing rain that is. The freezing rain line shifts north to along and north of 85. Okay, so any freezing rain that does fall south of 85 in the morning, that should be melting during the afternoon when it changes to rain. And then this is the evening time frame, tomorrow evening, and look how the freezing rain just keeps going across the Triad and north of 85. It just keeps going and going and going. And then eventually everything pretty much ends. This is Friday morning. Okay, so this should convey the timing about as good as anything we've got. Okay, because it's an ensemble. The thing I'm concerned about is how far south this freezing, this 32-degree line makes it. I mean, worst case scenario, it gets down to the South Carolina border. Okay, but I think the South Carolina border counties, climatologically speaking, and we always refer back to Climo to help us when there's a lot of uncertainty. Climatology would suggest that those places along the South Carolina border should stay rain. Okay, but as I mentioned earlier, the challenge, the real challenge, is what happens in here. Okay, what happens in here? It could be either way. It could be less or it could be more. And I'm just putting that out there because that's the uncertainty area. It always is. That's always the challenging area to predict. Okay, it's easy north of 85. It's easy across the south, but it's always hard in between. All right. So anyway, let's shift gears to rainfall and the hydro aspect, because either way you slice it, south of 85 is going to be all rain for the second wave tomorrow evening. And we're looking at rainfall amounts that may approach 3 inches. And what that'll mean is the river flooding, which I'm showing on the left, that's current river flooding. So you can see Smithfield, Goldsboro. So up on the Tar River, and down on the Cape Fear, there's some river flooding ongoing. And the little buttons there, or the little dots on the right, is an actual forecast. So the Haw River looks like it goes into flood, the Cape Fear into flood, the Rocky River into flood, the Roanoke, the Fishing Creek, the Tar, the Noosic at Goldsboro is forecast to go into moderate flooding. And I thought I'd share this table with you as a kind of a quick way. Now, right now, we don't have this available on our webpage. We're working to try to make this available on our webpage. We're working as hard as we can to try to make this available, but I do have it available for our briefings. And what this is a simple table to kind of convey what rivers are already in flood. So basically, that's this column right here shows what is right now in flood. Okay, so right now, what's in flood is Smithfield, Goldsboro, Fishing Creek at Enfield, and Roanoke Rapids. Okay, and then this column is what it will be when it reaches its crest. Okay, and basically this is saying that the Haw will go into flood, as well as the Liverpool River at Manchester, 21 feet. The Cape Fear at Fayetteville will go into flood, Norwood at 22 feet. And obviously, Smithfield at Goldsboro is going to go from minor to moderate, cresting at 23 feet. And in the same situation at Tarboro. Tarboro is going to go into moderate, cresting near 20. Okay. So anyway, with the heavy rain, obviously that's going to shift the gears to water and flooding for the second half of this event. All right, so I will, obviously I'm going to include this snapshot in the slides that I email out, and hopefully, sometime in the next few weeks, we'll be able to make this an available product on our webpage. So we're trying to get there. All right, so anyway, definitely take a look at this when you get the slides in your email. All right, so that kind of wraps it up. Our confidence is high. We're going to have this event. I only say moderate on impacts because the reason I say moderate is because of what happens in that transition zone. Does the ice accumulation get a little bit further south, or is it not so bad? So that transition zone north of 85, it's pretty much a slam dunk. But south of there, it gets challenging. Okay, so a quarter to a half inch of ice is a fairly good bet there north of 85. It'll start to accumulate early Thursday, finally ending Thursday night. Substantial or widespread tree damage, power outages, and hazardous travel conditions. Okay, south of 85, including the northern I-95 corridor, the northern Sandhills region, the western triangle, and the areas surrounding the Uwharrie National Forest region. Okay, so southwest portions of central North Carolina. Right now, we're expecting anywhere from a trace to up to 0.2 of an inch of ice accumulation. So that could give us scattered tree damage, power outages, localized hazardous travel, and especially bridges and elevated roads. So that region there, the third check mark, that's always the challenging location, as I've mentioned several times already. Okay. And south and east of the above mentioned regions, this is going to be an all rain event. So the southeast sections of central North Carolina, including the southern coastal plain and the South Carolina border counties, it mostly is an all rain. Okay. And then south of 85, we'll get into periods of heavy rain Thursday, late Thursday through Thursday night. And that's good news because south of 85, that'll help melt the ice. But it's bad news because there could be some flash flooding that develops. Okay. And then again, just definitely, if you have interest or concerns about the area rivers, or you live near a river, or you serve an area where one of these rivers runs through, definitely check out that table and those sites that I showed you a couple slides back, because that river flooding will be ongoing right through probably the weekend. All right, so that wraps up our briefing. Sorry we went a little long here. This is certainly many aspects to this hazardous weather event here tonight or tomorrow and tomorrow night. So basically our briefing schedule, we'll email these slides out here as soon as we wrap up. We'll be updating the slides as needed throughout the duration of the event. And our next live webinar will be at 11:30 tomorrow morning, same time, same place, same method. So that wraps up the 5 p.m. briefing here on this Wednesday, the 17th of February.